We all know the story of Ruth. There's been a famine in Israel, and there's a man named Elimelech. And to survive this famine, he decides to take his wife, Naomi, and his two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. And he decides to take them to the land of Moab. Now, unfortunately for Elimelech, once he gets to this land, he dies. Now, years pass, and Mahlon and Chilion marry Moabite women, and they too soon die. Naomi is left with nothing except her two daughters-in-law. And after losing everything, Naomi entreats her daughters-in-law to return to their families. But Ruth gives us that famous phrase, "Entreat me not to leave you, or to turn back from following after you. For wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts you and me." Naomi takes Ruth back with her to Israel. And there she meets a man named Boaz, who's a relative of Elimelech. And as we know, Ruth ends up marrying Boaz, the kinsman redeemer, because of the great faith he saw in her. Now, we often read this story and focus in on the great faith of Ruth. But sometimes, when we see her example, we're left wondering, how can I be a Ruth? She seems so perfect in this account. Her example seems almost unobtainable. And that's why I want to spend some time this evening talking about someone else in this story. I want to look at someone more comparable to us. I want to talk about Naomi. When we look at Ruth, at the story of Ruth, the impression Naomi gives is somewhat negative. She loses her family. She becomes bitter and depressed. She's angry at God because her family has been taken away from her and she is left with nothing. In verse 21, she says of Ruth chapter 1, "I went out full, and the Lord has brought me home again empty." Naomi goes even as far as to change her name. In verse 21, she says, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me." Do you know what Naomi means? It means peaceful. It means lovely. And the name Mara means bitter. It's easy to see why some people think of her in a negative light. Have you ever met someone who's just completely bitter and angry with God? When I was young, my dad was taking me door-to-door knocking for a meeting we were holding. I was around 6 or 8 at the time, so I'm not paying much attention. I'm doing the classic, "Can we go home yet?" But we walk up to this house, and it's got this long pathway, and we see a man there, and he's gardening, mowing, I don't remember exactly, some sort of yard work. But my dad approaches this man and hands him a flyer. And I remember the words he said to my father just brought me back to that moment. I stopped complaining. I was shell-shocked by the words he said. The man locked eyes with my dad, and he said, "I'm never going to church again because God killed my son." I'm sure Naomi felt a similar sort of bitterness as this man. And if this was all we knew about her, then I would understand the negative stigma. However, she didn't abandon God like the man Dad and I met did. She knew that the Lord was chastening her. Hebrews 12, verse 6, "For whom the Lord loves, he chastens." God loved Naomi, but Naomi had left the land of bread, the land of milk and of honey. Because of the Lord's chastening, Naomi returns obediently, but she returns bitter. Isn't this a great picture of us today? We will or will have already experienced some sort of tragedy in our lives, and this will probably cause us to question God. But the story that Naomi doesn't end with a bitter end. Instead, Naomi's story ends with a great blessing from God. Ruth, who returned with Naomi, turns out to be the greatest blessing she could have received. It's said that Ruth was better than 7 sons. Because Naomi was able to endure the chastening of the Lord, he blessed her with Ruth. And I believe this is the meaning of the story of Naomi. Naomi isn't some angry, bitter person who leaves God when things turn bad and sour for her. Instead, Naomi is a flawed human being who, even though she receives a severe chastening from the Lord, she remains faithful, she remains steadfast, although she questions why God caused this to happen. Her story shows us that even though we have tragedy happen that causes us to be angry with God and sad, if we endure our chastening that we receive from God, we will be blessed with a Ruth. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens, and scourges every son whom he receives. But if you endure chastening, God deals with you as sons. Thank you.